Welcome to Speaking of Strong Style, where we discuss the events, news, and issues surrounding New Japan Pro Wrestling. I'm Stephen Conway. With me, as always, is Jeremy Finestone. We are contributors to the Fight Game Media Network. Jeremy, we've had another week without any shows on New Japan World. We haven't watched New Japan all week except for NJPW Strong. But what we feel is that there's a gearing up toward a very busy fall schedule. So as we approach this, how have you been feeling? The time off freshening you up a little bit?
You know, I've really appreciated just getting in a car, enjoying a leisurely fall drive with all this free time that I have, watching with the lack of New Japan Pro Wrestling. It's been great. You know, just watching the leaves fall. That's been my real autumn action right now. It's just watching those leaves fall, taking my time, and just exerting my declaration of power, as I would say, as I exert some force over my schedule and enjoy my free time. But as I understand that's coming to an end, I know the power struggle that comes along with that, and I just think that I'm ready for the change. How about you?
If you could work the term Dontaku into all that, I would have been really surprised and impressed, for that matter, right there. That was a lot of New Japan buzzwords in the sentence there. I enjoyed that.
The amount of time I've had free has allowed me to mess around with some of this stuff.
What Jeremy and I are referring to is the Burning Spirit tour is continuing on. That's the tour they're working on right now, and they're touring and doing mostly house shows at the moment, to the point that in the last week, none of these shows have even appeared on NJPW World. There was the Chiba show, which was supposed to be video on demand, but hasn't popped up yet. I check every morning. And therefore, it has given us a lot of time to contemplate. But New Japan has given us some news to cover, and we will get into that, some announcements on future events and things that have been going on both in England and Oceania, talking about the Australian, the new Tamashi program out there, things on, I mentioned Royal Quest, things on some things that could even affect the Tokyo Dome, some things about the big show coming up, Declaration of Power, as you mentioned. So as all this news is kind of filtering out, and some of it's matches, some of it is just, well, this person will appear here, it starts to make you run through some scenarios in your head, doesn't it? It's like, as they continue to hint at things, it does give you that space that you get sometimes with the New Japan calendar, where you can start putting pieces together in your head and thinking, where are they going with that? They're announcing this, but they're not announcing that. And it just gives you a chance to do a little bit of conjecture, which I think is always kind of fun. But
yeah, I think we're kind of at the beginning of the marathon phase where we see the race that's coming up. We get an idea of where all the runners are going to be, and we can start placing our bets on who's going to win what. Everything's just kind of lining up into place, and whatever the 50th anniversary of New Japan Pro Wrestling is and is going to be, what they had planned, everything is going to start coming into clear vision. You know, we had unfortunate things here like Kota Ibushi not being able to come back, and a number of injuries to Sonata, Juice Robinson, Will Ospreay that really did throw a monkey wrench into a lot of the plans. But the big picture stuff really did kind of feel like it continued unabated. You know, I don't think that there was ever really a deviation from Jay White winning at Dominion and this being kind of like the plan that they had. So when we get to January and we can kind of look at the year in review, we can kind of assess, hey, this was great and this wasn't. But right now is a kind of a lay point to say, like, are we in the right direction? Is everything trending towards what we feel is going to be a satisfying year of New Japan Pro Wrestling?
And what's going on right now is the Burning Spirit Tour, as I mentioned. Now, just because there aren't shows on New Japan World doesn't mean there aren't shows. In fact, there are shows most days. And they've been touring around. They did a small building in Osaka, but they've been in some smaller places. These are mostly house shows. And we're not going to get into the full lineups and results because we've kind of talked about that. And we've kept an eye on them, and there isn't anything earth-shattering. I mean, it's about what you would expect. New Japan has this pattern where they put a title match on the horizon, and those are coming up. One is on Sunday, a few more the following week in Kobe. We'll talk about those. But they set up the challengers against the champions, not usually any kind of one-on-one situation. If it's a singles match, they're in a tag. If it's a tag match, they're in a multi-person tag. So they have other people filtering out among these factions and things. And more importantly, they can have someone other than champions and challengers taking pinfalls so that everybody looks strong going into these. So what we have is the House of Torture and Chaos. Now they're kind of up first in the title matches. It's the House of Torture group, the six-man evil. We're talking Yujiro Takahashi here. We're talking Dick Togo and all those guys battling with the members of Chaos. Now that's Yoshihashi, Goto. Yano has been getting involved in this, and then Yo. They've been facing each other in these sort of preview matches just about every night. Now, this is all leading up to a never six-man tag team match that has an extra stipulation in it for us, Jeremy. I'm trying to figure out how I feel about this stipulation, but coming up on Sunday the 18th, it is a tornado dog cage survival match. Now, you may have remembered actually something that I did get a kick out of was in one of these six-man never open weight matches. Chaos managed to corral the various members of Bullet Club or House of Torture, that section of Bullet Club, into this big dog cage, like what you would like when you have to pen a dog up, and locked them in there and invited the crowd to come and take pictures with them at Korakuen Hall. And after that, the Bullet Club obviously steamed about this, ended up locking Hirooki Goto in one. They drug a new one down to the ring and locked him in. So now we're going to have a tornado dog cage survival match. Here's how this works, allegedly. I think New Japan knows how this is going to work, although after reading about the stipulation, I'm not convinced they know exactly how this is going to work. This might be one of those things where later on they were like, how are we going to do this? Pinfalls and submissions count anywhere in the building. The tornado part comes in that there are not tags. It's just going to be everybody out there at once. So
not anarchy in the arena, but close.
Good luck to Red Shoes in this one. Good luck to Red Shoes. So pinfalls and submissions count. You can also throw your opponent in a cage. Apparently, there are going to be cages on each side of the ring. We're talking 4 cages here, so we're breaking the budget for this one. And if you are thrown inside the cage, you are eliminated from the match. So it sounds like you can win by throwing all of your opponents into the cage, each of the opponents into the cage until all of them are in there. Or you can also win by pinfall or submission, which may or may not, depending on the language you read, count anywhere in the building. But we know that there are not count. I guess I don't know that. That's the thing. It's a little subjective. Pinfalls and submissions we know count. No tags. You can also just chuck your opponents into a dog cage, but you have to get all of them in there. So this should just be an utter mess, right?
Are any titles on the line?
Yeah, these are the six-man, the never six-man tags are on the line out there. But I can't fathom that
the
various members of
the prestige of these titles right now.
And you know that Yano is almost certainly going to get involved in this thing. He was before. He's kind of been the fourth member of the team, so to speak, just like Dick Togo keeps poking his nose into things for House of Torture. So goodness knows what's going to happen out here with this one. But that's like you said, the prestige. But yeah, this one is a title match. The belts are on the line, apparently.
I am going to go with Chaos. My instinct says Chaos on this. I think I think there's some Wile E. Coyote on the House of Torture right now, and
well put, yeah.
I'm hesitant to think that anything will be elevated among either of these teams if the House of Torture wins via a dog cage gimmick match.
Yeah, this does feel like a thing where the heels finally get what's coming to them in a certain way here, doesn't it? It's because if you beat Chaos in this match, if House of Torture wins this one, I guess you can just say, well, they're bastards and they won, but you almost have to run it back with an even weirder stipulation after that, right? So
yeah, this feels like a very insulated story for the Burning Spirit tour, if you will, the way that they do some of these subplots within a little tour, and then they move on from the gimmick and the gear, and they're not bringing the dog cage with them to England, if you will, kind of thing.
Right.
This is localized to this kind of thing, and maybe it's a title change, but it just kind of feels like the six-man titles have been shifted off to the side for the majority of the summer, and it's just they're prop belts, but it's hard to say which one has gotten more of a short shrift in the recent history. The never open weight trios or the AEW trio titles. That's the kind of level of, it's just not the priority right now. And that's fine. You don't have to have every belt be a priority.
Right.
You're going into it, but it definitely doesn't feel like the best work is being done in New Japan over this series of feud.
You also have the feeling that Goto is going to want revenge because the last time they were in Korakuen Hall, they locked Goto in the cage and then broke the staff he has that I'm it's not a staff. I know it's not a staff. I don't remember what they call it.
It hurt me though. It hurt me when I saw it. It made me sad. Over the second ring, the ring buckle. I mean, that was just really that thing's been with him for a while. I feel like I was on a journey with that stick.
Yeah. Like did he have that thing? Did he have that before Yoshihashi had his? Might have been.
I don't believe so. I think that it kind of came with his package when he, how do I say this? Really got back into ring shape a couple of years ago. Like,
when he went and trained in LA with Shibata and all that.
Yeah, he was not at his best, and then he kind of recognized that he could step up his game, and he did so. I think it kind of happened around there.
Well, that's not the only rivalry going on the tour. There's also the one that's building to a title match, also between the United Empires, TJP and Francesco Akira. On the other side is Hantai's Ryusuke Taguchi and Master Wato, and they will be facing off in a tag match. We also see each night, fairly consistently, the heavyweight members of the Bullet Club, Bad Luck Fale, Chase Owens, a few others against Jeff Cobb, Great O'Khan, and Gideon Gray. We mentioned that. And Cobb and O'Khan have been protecting Gray. I noticed in the results, it's not Gideon just getting beat every night, although that has happened. So they've been playing that one pretty 50-50. Another rivalry that's going on that is not leading to a title match yet, but that's also part of the story. Taiji Ishimori and Kushida are usually in tag matches opposing one another on this tour, really building that one, and they're playing the long game with that title match. I wonder sometimes if that's not even going to happen until Tokyo Dome, if they're just going to really drag that all the way out and make Kushida prove himself over and over again until Ishimori decides he's worthy. But that could come in something like in November.
If you could hold it off and put them in opposing tag teams for the Junior Tag League, you could easily push that through to January.
And it just seems like I don't know that they have another challenger that would be even interesting for Ishimori until Kushida. Not that there aren't people who would have. Oh, you have one?
Yeah, Robbie Eagles in Tamashi.
Yeah,
like you bring Robbie Eagles over and do Taiji Ishimori. Something like that over there. I think that's probably a lock of putting them somewhere within each other's orbit. Him being a face, big junior heavyweight,
but no story behind it other than hometown hero goes for the title.
Yeah, I mean, I want another shot after coming so close in the Super Juniors tournament.
I just feel like Kushida is where they're going for the Dome, just because there's nobody else that they're even trying to tell a story with as far as Ishimori goes. So if Ishimori and Kushida wrestle each other before that, there's really no hints at anything that might come at the Dome. I suppose you always have Hiromu Takahashi there in your hip pocket if you want to put somebody in a main event and be taken seriously. But this feels like a Dome match that they're playing the long game.
Yes.
And LIJ has been wrestling Suzuki-gun a lot. And there's going to be some talent change-outs. I mentioned Doc Gallows and Carl Anderson are going to be going out to Japan pretty soon. We'll be seeing them. And we recently had a little run-in with them on Impact, right, Jeremy? I mean, the Gallows and Anderson, some things that affect New Japan going on there with Aussie Open.
Yeah, so Aussie Open is over in Impact now, and they are facing off with Chris Bay and Ace Austin this past week, part of the Aussie Open taking over the world, as it seems.
Every show.
They won an impressive match with their finisher, the Coriolis, and basically it was just step one of the number of matches that they had this week in which they were either headlining or stealing the show in a number of aspects. We'll hit up the New Japan Strong where they had the main evented with the West Coast Wrecking Crew. But, man, Aussie Open is definitely laying the groundwork for being a formidable force in New Japan every week.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, heck, they've really shown up in AEW even when they've been on Dynamite and things. They've had wonderful matches at Rampage. This has been a really strong summer for their careers, and these are very talented guys that have a long future ahead of them. And they, like you said, everywhere they go, they seem to either steal the show or impress everyone. And so I think they're going to have a lot of options open in the
When
next few
you
years.
talk about taking your opportunity,
Yeah,
when you get it and you don't miss your shot, this is what they're talking about.
yeah,
These two guys knew that this was like their chance to really step up. And a lot of people were like, why do we need this team? You got Cobb and Okan in New Japan, and they're already dominant as like a tag team. It's like, I'd like to see these guys versus Cobb and Okan at some point.
mm-hmm.
That's the level of like respect I have for when I see Aussie Open wrestle. Kyle Davis and Mark Fletcher are fantastic.
They're doing very
So
well.
just like there have been a lot of talented wrestlers this summer. There have been a lot of people whose names coming up in the conversation when they say these guys had a tremendous summer. We can look at guys like Moxley, look at Drew McIntyre, all these guys in various promotions. But when you like get to the nuts and bolts and really look at like inside of a federation and a body of work that a wrestler is doing, like you look at Aussie Open, it's like these guys have just done fantastic work this summer.
Done very well. So we'll be seeing more of them as we're going to talk about here. So now the next show after the Sunday show. So really there's the 6-man tag team title match is taking place there Sunday. It's the semi-main event though. It's also not the main event, which I thought was intriguing there, which is another note. They're going to do like an elimination tag on top there the following week at Kobe World Hall, September 25th. That is going to be one that has 3 different title matches on it and a bit of a rivalry match that we're going to have to bite the bullet and make it through. So first of all, Toro, Yano, and Doc Gallows are going to attempt to have an interesting wrestling match. I'm not convinced they're going to pull that one off, but that's on that card. We will have the junior heavyweight tag team title match. That's Wato and Taguchi against TJP and Akira. And I suppose as far as who wins that one, anytime you have something with the foreign wrestlers in Japan, there's always the question of how much time do they want to spend in Japan, and that's so the question of is TJP and Akira going to beat Wato and Taguchi? Well, I think if you can get TJP and Akira on a regular basis, you keep the titles on them. If I'm New Japan, they're a better team than Wato and Taguchi, and at the same time, if you can't get them, well, you got to put it on guys that you can get on a regular basis. So I think I think there's a lot of things behind the scenes that has to do with who goes over in this one, maybe more than anything else. But I'm hoping that Akira, certainly we see a lot of him in Japan. So a lot of it just depends on availability. But I think if they can keep the titles on those guys, I think they will. What are your thoughts
I'm with you on that one? I think the momentum is really with that team to solidify that division around them, and having Akira as a tag champion if they go to the UK will probably make a little bit of sense, and having them as the team to beat in the tag division, seeing as United Empire's already been so dominant, I do think that there is a belt that United Empire has that they might not have for the near future, but I do not think that Akira and TJP's belts are the ones that are at risk.
Fair enough. And after that, the main event is Will Ospreay and David Finlay for the U.S. title, and that should be just a fantastic match. You're talking about Finlay parlaying his wonderful G1 experience into a big match against Will Ospreay. Little chance of this one being anything but a lot of fun to watch. Should be a really good match between 2 really excellent wrestlers, and I think this one's probably going to be the best match of this tour.
I agree with you 100% that this has potential to be the best match of the tour. This feels like a normal day at the office for Will Ospreay, but the biggest match of Finlay's career, and so that is a very interesting dynamic to have when you're going into it. But at the same time, I feel incredibly confident that Finlay will be able to rise up to the challenge of him doing this. This is on par to me with Juice Robinson versus Jay White for the United States title a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
This is the level of like, this is his chance to go to the next level. And it may not be that he hits that next level like right away, but he's got the doorway and able to walk through when that time, like he is legitimized. And I feel like this is the time to really do something with Finley. So I would be shocked if Will Ospreay was still the U.S. champion going into Royal Quest. That would be, I just feel like there's a lot in Will Ospreay's future that would be a lot easier if he did not hold the New Japan U.S. title belt.
Yeah, I don't, well, for reasons we'll probably be getting into in the coming weeks, I don't quite see him getting to the Tokyo Dome with that, because I think there's other things for him there. And bigger things, to be honest with you. There, he's at the point now where he's kind of outgrown that championship. Really, he's not
in the same way that Kenny Omega outgrew the championship, and he ended up losing it to Jay White. He has world title around him, so when you have a regional title on the belt, it feels like he's there to elevate the title for the next person, but the title won't really elevate him.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think it's probably time for Will to leave that one behind. And if he does put it on Finlay, well, that's an excellent way to do exactly what we talked about. Mm-hmm. He's the kind of guy that could be elevated by a championship like 100%. This. So. After that, not long after that, as a matter of fact, only about a week after that. It seems like every single weekend we have something interesting in New Japan going on here. Royal Quest, October 1st. And the highlight for this one is FTR's first IWGP World Tag Team title defense against, who else? Who could it be? Who's everywhere all the time? It's against Aussie Open, who have earned that title shot there. So it'll be FTR's first title defense against Aussie Open. It's going to be a fantastic match. These are four really great wrestlers. We already talked about Aussie Open. I've made my opinion clear on FTR. I think this is the best tag team on earth today. And I see them getting the win in this one. I don't think they're going to lose in their first defense after waiting so long to defend them. There's a lot of politics involved with all that, but I don't think they're going to be one and done on that, because again, I think there's more to come with the tag team tournaments coming up and things. So, but it's going to be a fabulous match, I think. And then we go into the tag team tournament there, but. A Royal Quest there that night one. That's a heck of a match to have.
So it's been super odd. They really haven't defended those titles, right? Other than
no, I don't think they have a defense under. Although they've had opportunities to do so, but there's a lot going on in AEW right now. So
okay, so
haven't quite gotten around to booking that one.
Just to be clear, only the IWGP tag titles are on the line, not the strong tag titles. This is not
title versus
title. They're just like, hey, you want a shot at this? Come and get it. No. So it could go either way, wink, wink, but you really does feel like Aussie Open, as dominant as they have been, sometimes might be meeting their match or biting off more than they can chew. And the living legends feel like they will be legendary in the UK on the first night of October to me.
There's also a long history in New Japan booking, going even before Gedo, but including Gedo, of considering your first big title match to be an elevation in and of itself. Mm-hmm. Don't always, and you can get into trouble in wrestling using the words always and never, because it's not a good idea, because there are situations for everything. So it is frequent that you will lose your first big title opportunity, your first big title match, because a lot of times the promotion says just getting to a title match is a step in the evolution of a team, in the evolution of a wrestler, and then you still have the title win to come. You save that. Each step in the ladder means something in New Japan. I feel like Aussie Open is probably going to have a heck of a match and probably lose. And then that'll just mean that they're legitimate title contenders going forward. And I think they will use that as a next step in their evolution as a top of the card team.
There's going to come a time where Jeff Cobb and Great Khan are not a tag team in the United Empire. And there's going to come a time where the Aussie Open are going to be one of the top tag teams in the New Japan tag team division. And that time is coming sooner rather than later, and we should all be ready for that.
What's interesting, though, is we don't know a whole lot about Royal Quest, Jeremy, and this is a 2-night event going on in England, and I'm about to announce the other match of which we know, and that is on night 2, a tournament match for the IWGP Women's Championship. Now, this is the belts that they're going to create so that they can have women on the card in at least in the United States when they tour the United States, possibly in Tamashi going forward. We don't know that, but just in places where you would expect to have women on the card. And so again, they're using their affiliation with Stardom, both Stardom and New Japan, owned by Bushi Road, the same conglomerate. But the two women that are competing, they're making it an international tournament, which is fair enough. The two women competing at Royal Quest are Alpha Female and Ava White. I'll be honest, I don't know a whole lot about these two. That's my fault. I just haven't been in my orbit lately.
Come on, man. What are you doing?
The wonderful thing about being a wrestling fan is that there's literally too much to watch.
There's always something that somebody doesn't know, and anyone who says that they know everything about every aspect of wrestling is just trying to get points, and don't put you to the test on that one.
but there's a perfectly good reason. I mean, you want to make this tournament look international. I totally understand. It's fine. And you know, I don't know a whole lot about these two. I'll find out at Royal Quest, but those are the only two matches we know right now, Jeremy, on a 2-night show, only a couple of weeks out. I'm looking at it here as we record. It's the 15th, and this is October 1st, and we don't know a whole lot about this. Now, there are a couple of things that the storylines have hinted at perhaps happening, but it's interesting, isn't it, that we know so little about these shows?
So I've had one in the back pocket that I think that they've been planning, and it goes all the way back to the G1, where they had a flash pin, very short match, and they've been building a pithy feud ever since. And I feel like the UK might be the right place to do a proper Naito versus Zack Sabre Jr. main event match, in which that we get the 25-30 minute classic that we thought we were going to get back in the G1. I think a lot of us were very confused as to why that happened and just presumed it was to save Naito's body before an immensely grueling match with Will Ospreay the next night. But there also could have been some plans down the line of like, hey, we got this thing in the UK. Zack Sabre Jr. versus Naito is a top feud. You already have Jay White and Okada kind of tied up in other stuff. And, you know, I won't be taking a victory lap because it seems kind of obvious that Naito versus Zack Sabre Jr. might be a main event match in the UK, but I haven't seen a whole lot of people suggesting it. So I'm just going to throw that out there. It seems like a good idea.
We'll see. I mean, they have to announce this card, these cards. There's two of them fairly soon. So we'll definitely be covering that once that information becomes available. So after that, we keep going through this calendar here because the next big show, and this is bigger than the 25th, bigger than the 18th, and until they announce some more matches, it's bigger than Royal Quest, really, as far as storyline goes. October 10th, back in Japan, Declaration of Power. Now, this is the one that has a double singles match. Now, I don't want to say double main event because the IWGP World Heavyweight title match is probably going to be the main event, but underneath it is a very big match also. It's going to be Tama Tonga challenging Jay White for that World Heavyweight title, the IWGP World Championship, and then Okada, the G1 winner, not putting the briefcase on the line. This is not a thing where someone can steal the Tokyo Dome main event, but he is facing the only guy that beat him in the G1 in Jonah. This is a fascinating night here because without that briefcase on the line, it opens it up to the idea of Okada maybe losing to Jonah again and having Jonah go into the Tokyo Dome as this monster contender, the elephant in the room, if you will. Possibly. It could also be that they give Okada his win back. That's a New Japan thing too. But Tama Tonga and Jay White, similar situation here to Aussie Open, I feel, Jeremy. This is something where being in this match elevates Tama Tonga to a place he hasn't been before. The G1 certainly elevated him to a place he hasn't been before. This babyface run, I think, is taking off far beyond people's expectations. Having a good match with Jay White and losing it, but having a good showing is still going to help Tama Tonga. That's certainly what I expect out of that one. So that's how I kind of see Declaration of Power going. But that's the big show for October coming up for New Japan, and pretty much tease up the Tokyo Dome as far as the big matches go.
I think perception is reality in a lot of these things, and the fact that you've kept Tama Tonga off of this tour, and basically the last thing that you've seen was the win, the victory, and then he is just kind of like, that's the last thing that you've seen of him, gives him a lot more momentum than if you were to just put him out into 6-man, 8-man, 10-man tags, and giving him a win here or there, but maybe it wasn't going to be as exciting or electrifying, other than just keep him warm for Jay, and then have him give that match, but don't soften the crowd on him, because this is the most momentum that he's ever had. So I think keeping him off this tour until it's really time to heat him up was probably one of the smartest moves that they could have done with him, because I really don't know how hot he would have been or how much he would have added to the tour. Maybe he would have come off as just a guy, and he doesn't need to be just a guy going into a match with Jay White. Like you said, this is a big opportunity. Perception is reality, and the perception right now is he's on a great momentum after the G1, and let's not ruin that.
So we will see that on October 10th. From there, they have actually added an additional show. Now, they're going all over the world here. So we've already mentioned that 2-night stand in England. They're going to be in New York City on October 28th. Now, we knew that. We knew that one was coming. What they did was, the tickets for that one went so well, they actually procured another night in the building the night before, October 27th. Now this is a 2-night event. And apparently they're going to bundle these 2 events on Fight TV. You can order both if you choose to. $30. And so now we're going to see October 27th and October 28th at the Palladium Theater, not too far off Broadway there in New York City. So 2 nights there. We don't have any information about lineups on that one at all, except that I guess it says something that the tickets, without any kind of a lineup whatsoever, sales were strong enough, they decided to do it again.
So there are 2 things about this that are very interesting. Dave Meltzer on his show, Wrestling Observer Radio, mentioned that the show was originally intended for Madison Square Garden, but the sales were a little too soft, but not so soft that they couldn't do 2 nights elsewhere and get a great turnaround. It also appears that Jay White may be facing Eddie Kingston on the proper night, not the Halloween night, because even though Eddie Kingston got COVID at the last taping, Jay White went out of his way to call him out as if that was going to be the plan going into the Rumble in New York. So it hasn't been officially announced, but wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It really does seem like Eddie Kingston versus Jay White will be headlining that show. They
send Eddie everywhere, don't they? They just send him out. If you need an AEW representative, they'll just send Eddie out there.
It really does feel like he's the Mick Foley of this decade right now.
A little bit. But Eddie getting a world title shot in New York should probably help. But obviously Madison Square Garden is ambitious for anything right now. I mean, they for the G1 finals, they didn't even sell out Budokan Hall. So things are a little bit softer on that. I know that going over to New York and as a special occasion is a different thing. Madison Square Garden's a big building, and that's an awful lot to ask. It's great, but and of course it's legendary. It's also incredibly expensive, and it's big. There are a lot. It puts a lot of people in there. So this Palladium Theater, I don't think quite holds 2,000. So we're talking more of a Korakuen Hall. Certainly not. I mean, it's very different than Korakuen Hall, but I'm talking about capacity wise. That's a little bit more of what we're looking at here. And the tickets for them, I mean, the VIP ones are like $200+ each. It's mostly over $100 to be in the orchestra out there. And then, it gets a little bit cheaper as you get higher up in that theater. So they can still bring in a good chunk of change. That Palladium, 2 nights at the Palladium, especially if they fill it up. And I think it'll probably make for a pretty cool television atmosphere too, which never hurts.
Yeah, I'm gonna buy it. Obviously, we got to
Yeah,
cover it for the show, but I'm
sure.
gonna enjoy it. It's like it is one of those that it does not feel like it's going to be the most important show in the month of October, or even the month of November for New Japan, because we got the start of New Japan crossover coming in November.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff going on there, but at the same time, it does feel like the biggest of the domestic New Japan shows as of late. You know, we have the Autumn Attack, and we had a couple of the High Alerts, and a lot of these shows that are aired piecemeal in New Japan Strong, and they're all well and good. But my criticism in the past has been they just don't feel like they're as high a level as the proper New Japan shows. And I know that they're working on addressing that. There's a lot of perception, you know, a good distant like competitor in the domestic stage with the other ones. AEW and WWE right now, especially in like the New York market, like WWE is running the show over there. With that said, like if you're going to bring Eddie Kingston and Jay White, you're telling somebody that you want to be competitive in the market, and I'm all about that.
It's an interesting time to be a wrestling fan in New York, isn't it? You have New Japan coming in. You have the big show in Queens coming up next week for AEW. So in a couple of month span, and of course WWE still runs Madison Square Garden. What is it, about quarterly or regularly? I don't know about Madison Square Garden, but they run the New York area.
Aren't they Barclays for 3
Yeah, they've been doing. You're right. I just caught myself. They've been doing the Barclays Center. It's a little cheaper to run than Madison Square Garden. It's still a beautiful building. Another nice
incredibly
NBA
competitive
arena.
market for wrestling.
Sure is, yeah, and so it's got to be fun to be a fan out there, and for that one, so yeah, and some more names for Tamashii. Now, this is the shows that are going to start up in November out in Australia, and again, Tox Fale, Bad Luck Fale's dojo, heavily involved in this one, but we have some more names besides this, don't we, Jeremy? Than we had last time, this time last week. So some of them are no surprise whatsoever. Bad Luck Fale is going to be there. Therefore, we're going to see other members of Bullet Club. They've mentioned Taiji Ishimori and, of course, junior heavyweight champion. That kind of leads to a rather obvious matchup, like you said. Again, not announced yet, but makes too much sense maybe. I would expect, again, now that we don't know, but we would expect Aussie Open to be part of that somewhere in there. Well, we do know that Michael Richards is going to be in on this. We have that, and we also have announced that they also have announced. I'm saying it here now, but they announced it. They're the ones that are actually paying people to show up. Just in case you didn't know how that worked at home, I'm not actually paying the New Japan wrestlers to show up.
No paid promotion on this show, guys.
Yeah, no, can't afford it until we get some sponsors on this thing. But Jeff Cobb. Yes. So some big stars now. I mean, they're obviously taking this pretty seriously, and you would, right? I mean, you would, especially your first go around in here. But this is shaping up to be some shows with some big names on them. So Jeff Cobb, Michael Richards, kind of a new name that we're not used to seeing on New Japan shows, and some that we are, like the Bullet Club, Ishimori, and Cobb. So your thoughts on some of the news trickling out about this new venture in Oceania?
You know, it sure seems like they're committed to making this a successful venture out the gate. They're lining up a lot of the talent that, you know, New Zealand, Australia, the Oceania region is familiar with, but you need to also start advertising actual like main event New Japan stars. I get waiting a little while to bring in Jay White and make sure everyone there, but Jay White needs to be there. Either Naito or Okada, Tanahashi, a lot of these guys, like this isn't going to be the successful venture that you think it is if they can't fly the 3 or 4 hours from one place to the other and at least do one of these shows. That's the kind of level that I would expect when they're broaching this new territory, that they make sure that they commit to that level of star power to it. Because as much as I love Fale, as much as I think Kenta and Ishimori are tremendous stars, Jeff Cobb is, I will sing his praises up and down all day long. Like they're not the marquees of New Japan. They're not the faces that people say, like, I come out to New Japan for this. So once we start getting some of those big stars, they don't have to be in singles matches. They can be in tags, and you know, you can do a Bullet Club or you can do a Chaos or LIJ kind of thing. That's what I'm kind of looking for. It's like the level of commitment to the star power of making sure that this comes off like a big deal regionally, rather than like, yeah, we're just gonna dip our toes in the water and see how it goes. Like, they have a chance to be really aggressive in a new region, and they should really take it.
Well, we'll see what they do with it here. And so far, again, no matches announced, no particular matches announced, some stars announced, not particular matches. So we're reading tea leaves. And speaking of tea leaf reading, we're going about as far out as we're going to go with this next one as far as time goes. Thinking about the Tokyo Dome, January 4th, my birthday present every year, Jeremy. I get to have the big show on my birthday there. Tokyo Dome this year, always a lot of conjecture, especially with this AEW partnership after Forbidden Door, as to what AEW stars might come over for Wrestle Kingdom. That's been getting kicked around since they came up with the working agreement in the first place, and really even before that. We got a little bit of information this week that kind of throws a wrench into a couple of things. So AEW is running its very first show in the Seattle market the same day, January 4th. It's Wednesday this year. So Dynamite is going to be in Seattle, Washington. I think one name that everyone was hoping we were going to get, not just one, but one of the names that people were hoping we would see is Bryan Danielson. That seems very unlikely now. It's difficult to imagine Bryan Danielson being in the Tokyo Dome when they're running basically his wrestling de facto hometown. I don't think he's from Seattle specifically, but he's from Washington State. He's certainly heavily associated with the Pacific Northwest area. The fans love him everywhere he goes. But for them to run that building for the first time, or for run that town without him, seems pretty unlikely. I know that there's been some talk that, well, if you look at the airplane schedules and you figure all this stuff out, and with the way that the wind blows, that a plane can get from Tokyo to Seattle in time for a man to do both shows. I can't fathom they would take the chance on a national television show of there being a delay in the wintertime somewhere. And so while I was really hoping to see Bryan Danielson in the New Japan ring sometime before I die, doesn't look like it's going to be January 4th, does it?
It really doesn't. I mean, I think there were, I know people that were doing mental gymnastics, and I mean that lovingly, in order to like figure out, can they make this work? Can he wrestle 2 main event matches for 2 major shows in the same day in 2 different continents? I mean, when we're having that level of, can he do this? Like, Bryan Danielson is amazing. He frequently defies expectations, but you're asking for 2 matches in which he's going to go an hour, maybe between the 2, and take a flight in between. And there's a lot of things that have to go right, and only one thing that has to go wrong.
Exactly.
And I think when you look at it like that, it's just maybe not today, maybe not that day. And I'm sorry that your birthday is not going to have that, but there will be other days that you can celebrate and say, it feels like my birthday when this happens.
Well, if they want to make it up to me, they can always put another match that I am dying to see, which is the Kenny Omega Will Ospreay match that both Kenny and Will have been building towards, and put it on that show. And the reason that I think I feel more confident than ever that it's going to happen, because when they had that 6-man tag in an AEW ring with Will and Aussie Open against the Bucks and Kenny Omega, and they did that extra angle after AEW went off the air where he came in and gave Kenny the hidden blade. I just thought, you don't do that to build anything on Dynamite or on Rampage or even on Full Gear in November or anything. That felt like something they did just so they can show it later on New Japan or something like that, because they didn't mention it either. They didn't mention it the following week. That felt like a New Japan angle on an AEW show. So this is just, again, I'm reading, like I said, we're reading tea leaves here, but that felt like a way to set up something in a New Japan ring for those two, which is what we all want to see. We don't know what the status of Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks are right now, just like we don't know what CM Punk. There's an external investigation going. They've hired somebody third party to come in and talk. We don't know. But even without that whole controversy, there was a pretty solid shot that there was going to be an elite presence in New Japan. Bucks and Kenny Omega heavily associated with New Japan Pro Wrestling, of course. It was the first thing that came to mind when they had the working agreement was, oh, Kenny and the Bucks could be back, and some other people too, Moxley, all that stuff. Makes all kinds of sense. So if they want to make up to me with the Danielson thing, I'm just saying, just putting it out in the universe here, that's one way that I would still, I'm going to enjoy Wrestle Kingdom anyway, aren't I? But that would be a nice little present. I'm just saying they can make it up to me.
So we've gone over this a couple of times, but do you see FTR in the tag tournament in November for New Japan? And do you see them retaining the belts through that whole journey of New Japan? Do you think that their cachet is so great that they'll be holding on to that title as prestige for the rest of the company? Or do you think that FTR has a chance of losing the titles before Wrestle Kingdom?
Well, there's always a chance, right? I mean, if things fall apart with AEW and especially, again, we talked about this, several big time AEW stars are off the shows right now. And one of which, Punk, is off for a very long time, whether that fight had happened or not, because he tore his tricep in the match. He was going to be done for 8-9 months anyway. And then you had the whole thing with the Bucks and Kenny. Obviously, those guys were figured in major ways in Tony's plans. All that stuff kind of goes out the window right now. The reports are out that John Moxley, I saw in a couple of different places, that Moxley was going to take a vacation before all this happened. And now he's not taking his vacation anymore. Saying that before all this had happened, if they had just done a pay-per-view and everybody went home and everybody bit their tongue and everybody just decided to be pissed for another week and not have a big brawl, I would have said that FTR could, because I don't think they're going to lose to Aussie Open. I don't think they're going to lose in their first title match. Just don't see it. For what reasons we talked about earlier. After that, it's tournament time. I don't see them having another match before that tournament and dropping those titles. Again, this is before all this happens. So that would lead me to believe that FTR might defend and probably, this is what I was thinking, that they would face and probably lose to whoever wins the heavyweight tag team tournament at Kingdom. That's just where I was thinking. They aren't long-term champions. They can't be. They're not going to be full-time New Japan wrestlers. This is something that's going to be that they were going to hold for a while, and we're eventually going to lose this thing because eventually they're going to want their belts back, their titles back. They want their champions on their shows. This is a very nice thing to do for right now, and it is intriguing having the IWGP champions on American shows on AEW and all that stuff, but it's not a long-term solution. After all this has happened, and people are going to have to shuffle around to fill spaces in major storylines and angles right now that aren't going to happen because people are benched or suspended or injured. Now I'm less confident that they're going to go all the way into that with the belts. I think that it could be a thing where Tony Khan talks to New Japan and just says, guys, if you want your belts back, we'll have to figure something else because I'm going to need FTR an awful lot. So I'm less confident in that whole idea of them defending the title at Kingdom than I was. Still leaning toward it, but instead of 80-20, I think I'm like 65-35 on that. So that's kind of where I am. I still think it'll happen, but a couple more injuries, which seem to happen all the time these days, and with major stars in AEW, and they might have to pull the string. Might have to.
So
that was a long answer. I'm sorry that took so long.
You're good. You're good. I mean, I teed you up and you took a hit and I just chased the ball for a while. It's all good.
So yeah, I guess that's my thing. Is like, man, one or two more things go wrong for AEW with major stars, and I just think that it's going to have to be a thing. All right, everybody come back home. I can't send everybody out right now. I don't have anybody to headline these shows.
I feel like there's an aspect of you got to make FTR happy that is in play. They are one of the top acts in the company, so you got to make them look strong. You got to pacify them. The other aspect that I'm thinking about is who is at the cachet of New Japan as a tag team. If it's not the Great O'Khan and Jeff Cobb, that can beat them. Exactly, like, are we talking like a Mega Powers level, like Shingo and Naito, like teaming up to like win these titles together, that kind of thing, like, or like that? That's just like the first thing I could think of. I'm not even remotely like suggesting that, but yeah,
I just raised my hand. I think, like, now, again, if we're shifting things around,
yeah,
and we have a little bit of time here. First of all, I think Dangerous Tekkers are still on a thing where they could be tag team champions again, and I think the fans in New Japan would take them seriously. How about Tama Tonga, Hiroshi Tanahashi? Just putting that out there.
I am into it, but Tama Tonga had such a career with Tanga Loa as tag team that I feel like it would be a step back for him to take the tag titles, regardless of who he's winning it from. Like, I think that there's a concerted effort with him. It's not a bad idea, but there's like, it's like, I was listening to the Fight Game podcast with LaRocca and Garrett, and they were talking about like the Mega Powers handshake, how they would hold the wrist, and like the power that coursed through their hands if they teamed up to take on these opponents that were unbeatable. That's like the level of what I'm thinking here, of like, what kind of team is going to be able to beat FTR if FTR is carrying these titles all the way through to Wrestle Kingdom? Because we're not talking a Dontaku match. We're not talking like a Burning Spirit co-main event. This is a Wrestle Kingdom match. Like, if you're going to have FTR in a Wrestle Kingdom match, this is going to be, my expectations, it should be better than versus the Briscoes on a Ring of Honor pay-per-view. Like, that's what I'm like. So who can do that?
And also, as I'm going it over to my head, I'd be remiss if I didn't make correct an omission that we made off the Kobe World Hall show. Tanahashi might be busy defending the Never Openweight title because he's facing Carl Anderson for it there in Kobe on the 25th. Should have mentioned that earlier and didn't. So the Tama Tonga Hiroshi Tanahashi thing just jumped into my head. Seriously,
but that's basically like where I'm thinking of. It's like stature, position, placement, prominence. These are all like who, what, where, why, when. Like, if you're gonna put the belt on FTR, where is this going?
Yeah.
And like, New Japan always has plans. Like, they don't do things just to like, ooh, let's pop the crowd and put the belt on FTR. They're going somewhere with this. And everyone was in agreement on it. And I feel like if Tony Khan is going to agree to have FTR do this, like, for the sake of a good business partner, he's going to see it through regardless of whether he needs to pivot in the middle of it. Like, he went to these guys for a reason, because he probably didn't have short-term plans for them that were better than this. So they've been holding the ROH title for like 6 months. They've been holding the AAA titles for like 8 months. They're going to be holding these for like 3 months. There's going to come a point where at the end of 2022...
Did we lose Jeremy there? Is he frozen?
Am I frozen?
Oh, wow. You time warped right there.
Sorry.
So there you go. We got you back right there. No, it's okay. So you were saying, though, that they held the ROH titles, but were kind of frozen, or while you were frozen. But it's interesting you said that, because
titles,
as far as having multiple championships yet still being put on ice, that's really the story of FTR in AEW, where they get an occasional little burst and then they're shuffled off as quickly as possible. We can tucked neatly away.
This is the dark side of cooperation with different companies, man. You gotta please a lot of people in order to make sure everyone's happy with the way that their perception is reality.
Yeah, there are a lot of politics going on with that too. So that's but we'll see how that ends up. But yeah, anyway, so some thoughts on the Tokyo Dome. As I said, these are all strictly tea leaf reading here, but those are some thoughts that could have FTR, could have Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay, probably not Danielson, but we'll see. Maybe the other people that have had a long history with the company, certainly, perhaps, a Lance Archer type could come back over and be involved in something there, someone that's really associated with New Japan. So who knows? Obviously, as the fall tees off, we'll be seeing some more things come up, and maybe those tea leaves will get a little clearer. So.
We'll be here keeping you updated.
And of course, like you said, right now, a lot of the things that are going to make those decisions as to who can go to Tokyo and who can't, well, I think Tony is probably feverishly writing out the next 3 months of the show that he had to tear up and throw away. So,
Mr. No Plan B.
It's entirely possible he doesn't know yet, and that's because goodness knows that things have gone sideways in that department. So we'll see how it turns out. But with that, let's go to something that we do know about, Jeremy, and that's NJPW Strong. What do we have this week? Some interesting stuff you were telling me earlier.
We had 3 matches. The first match was former Luke Dorado. I just completely blanked on his name. I feel so bad about this.
See, Mascara Dorada?
Mysterioso versus Mascara Dorada. All of a sudden, all of the names just went right out the window.
Yeah, he's back to being Mascara Dorada, right? Yeah.
Yes, Mascara Dorada, the former Luke Dorada that you would know from WWE. And they had a lucha match in which they were told to just go out there for 12 minutes and do your shit. In the nicest way possible. Like, go out there, you got 12 minutes. It was great. These guys can go out there and do this stuff in the sleep. But unfortunately, I think one of them did fall asleep about 10 minutes in.
Damn.
And things kind of went off the rails. They missed a move, and what you basically saw was a lucha match kind of fall apart for the last 2 minutes until they repivoted and got things back on the rails. Mascara Dorado won with the Guadalajara Country Slam, and it was good. It was a little rugged, it wasn't smooth. Like, I know that when you watch like a WWE or an AEW lucha match, there's like smooth movements, everything. This wasn't smooth. It was kind of a bit more brutal of a lucha match. Like, it looked like things they would flip, and when they impacted, it hurt. It wasn't like flip, land, jump back up, that kind of thing. So definitely worth checking out if you have extra time in your wrestling watching schedule. Then we got the return of Robbie Eagles.
Hey.
Robbie Eagles, who we haven't seen since the Best of the Super Juniors came back for this match, and he went up against Kevin Blackwood. Blackwood is someone that's shown up a few times in New Japan Strong. He's about Robbie Eagles' side, colored, blonde, bleached hair, spots, tattoos, kind of a general look for wrestling nowadays. And he's got talent. He seems like a guy that is going to have an opportunity in New Japan in the future. And he was basically there to make Robbie Eagles look good. This is one of those elevation matches in which they're just making sure that, you got to see a big star in Robbie Eagles, and he got that Robbie Eagles reaction. And then we had the Mark Davis and Kyle Fletcher featurette again, in which the Openweight Tag Team Championship of Aussie Open defeated the West Coast Wrecking Crew of Royce Isaac and Jor-El Nelson. We've been singing the praises of Royce Isaac since he was at the G1. Jor-El Nelson did a great job back in the States wrestling while he was away. This tag team took Aussie Open to the limit, and they beat the holy crap out of each other in this match. If you watched the acrobatics that the Aussie Open did in their trios match against the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, this was almost a complete flip, in which this wasn't as much flips as it was just brutal power moves, double teams, counters, pin breakups, all those big tag team crucial fights that you have. Like, this is an elevation of the tag team division kind of match. Like, You're watching these two, and you're just like, these two teams are making this division feel more important just by the match that they had. So I would say it was probably the best Aussie Open match of the week, better than their Impact match, and better than I don't think there are any other matches. But I would go out of your way to see it if you have the New Japan subscription, or you have some credits for Fight TV. so on, and so forth. And that was the strong results recap.
Sounds like an interesting show this week.
I enjoyed watching it, and I did a couple of times where I was like, ooh, which I don't do often with wrestling, but Kozlov amuses me, and so the show is. I understand why it is not priority viewing for a lot of people. New Japan Strong, but there are gems on that show, and if you like a certain kind of wrestling, it is 100% going to satisfy that craving.
Well, all right.
You gonna go for the
I think I am. I am.
Do this.
So we have a little bit of history now. One of the shows, excuse me, from this past week was a. And now, of course, I'm going to go horse a little bit, but a 30th anniversary show for Eugene Nagata. This was in Chiba. And this past week, that was part of this tour. And it was kind of a special event, the big Blue Justice event there. That's his nickname. And he ended up working the main event, and he lost that main event. He put over Great Okan in Chiba there. So that was the main event match in the Chiba branch of the Burning Spirit Tour. But I wanted to get into a little bit of Eugene Nagata. I feel like if you've joined New Japan in the last 5 or 6 years, that Eugene Nagata is kind of the elder statesman, an older guy that's usually in early card matches, usually working with young lions, and maybe people don't exactly know what all Eugene Nagata has meant to New Japan over the years. No, he's a legend. They're happy to tell you that. But what exactly was his career like? He was one of the top stars in New Japan during a very turbulent, difficult period in the company's history. And his career kind of weaved through all of those threads, a time when coming up when New Japan was very hot, working his way through a period where it dropped off, almost went out of business, and then was there for the reclamation project when things rebuilt. And he was a part of all of it. So he's 54 years old, for one thing, and he's still going. And if you watch him, still has terrific matches. I mean, his battle with John Moxley, I believe, was a fabulous match. He still has terrific matches with Minoru Suzuki, one of his lifelong rivals. This is a man that can still go at his age. At 54, he's in tremendous shape. He's surprisingly, just his body is held up surprisingly well. And it's particularly surprising given his background. So, and his whole career. He was born in Chiba in 1968, so that's why his anniversary show is always in that part of the country. So he was a Greco-Roman wrestler before he got into pro wrestling. So he appeared in the 1991 World Championships. He was at the Asian Championships in 93 and 94. And was a pretty high-level Greco-Roman wrestler. He got into pro wrestling when that career started winding down and started in 1992. Now, despite him being so associated with the Young Lion program there, Jeremy, as far as somebody who trains the guys, works with them, gets in the ring with them all the time and has matches with them, he really wasn't a part of that system. He started in New Japan, and 5 months after he began, he debuted. So they put him in pretty quickly. And he excelled pretty fast. Now, one of the things that helped him was, as he joined up with the company, very soon, within a couple of years, they entered this a worked feud with the UWFI promotion. Now, this was a company that called itself a shoot fighting company. Top star was Nobuhiko Takada, who had been a junior heavyweight in New Japan, but then they presented themselves as a shoot fighting thing. So, we're real. They weren't. It was still worked. UWFI was still work, but it was wildly successful for a while. And Nobuhiko Takada had stadium matches on top with that title against Vader, for one, doing, again, work shoots. So, however, the company kind of ran out of stars. They kind of run through all their top matchups, and UWFI kind of faded. And eventually they joined back up with New Japan. The whole thing merged up again. They created a UWFI New Japan feud as an angle. So the whole thing was kind of an invasion angle. So one of the early versions of that, where the UWFI guys came in, and Nagata, who had the legit credentials of being a Greco-Roman wrestler, was part of the New Japan contingent against these shoot fighters coming in. And that was where he got some of his early elevation up the cards, was that this is a guy who was going to take on these shoot fighters. So he was a big part of that UWFI angle, and that helped his career quite a bit. He ended up going on excursion, and he went to WCW. So this is when they still had a bit of a working agreement with WCW. He feuded with Ultimo Dragon there. He was there about 18 months in WCW, starting there in February of, was it? February of 1997. He began there. And all the way through about summer of 98. He was a heel there, actually, and working with junior heavyweight, Ultimo Dragon. He was managed by Sonny Ono, who may have the distinction of being among the very worst managers in the history of wrestling right there. So, interesting thing there. But Nagata still managed to get through all that. Now, of course, if you remember what WCW was like in that era, we're talking about 1996 was the peak. That was when Diesel and Razor Ramon moved over and became, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, the Outsiders, the Hulk Hogan turning heel. That was 1996. By 1997, that stuff was starting to work its way through a little bit. It wasn't the complete disaster that 98, 99 would be for WCW. So he was right as that kind of roller coaster was going over the peak and about to drop off. So he was there for some of that. And of course, there were some terrific, wonderful junior heavyweights during that period. And Nagata had some terrific matches there with the Ultimo Dragon. He also began to develop a style, mention that UWFI feud. Something you see in Nagata's working style now. The MMA style kicks, stuff that kind of Bryan Danielson does as well. Some of the chops, the stiffer style makes it look a little bit more shoot-ish, so to speak. That was all kind of came into his style. So he was going over into the United States, working with a technical master and a flying master like Ultimo Dragon. He has this kind of shoot-ish training that he got as a part of that UWFI feud. He was kind of turning into a very interesting mix of guys that looked like they could do MMA type of things, and then he was also a good professional wrestling worker. When he came back to Japan, they put him right at the top of the cards. He came back. The title was actually vacant because Masachono had an injury. So he challenged for the IWGP title very soon after returning to Japan, the heavyweight title. And he ended up losing to Scott Norton. Became kind of a theme in this part of his career where he was the bridesmaid and not quite the bride. He made this, he would get through the block part of the G1, but lose in the semifinals. He, like I said, lost to Norton to fill a vacant title. This happened again when, there was it was in 2000. Oh, yeah, he won the 2001 G1. Excuse me. He won the G1 in 2001. After 2 straight years of losing in the finals, he beat Kaiji Muto. And there was another time when he, to Yasuda, he lost to Yasuda when they were filling a vacant title as well. So there were all these things where he would get almost there and not quite, almost there and not quite. But he did finally win the G1 in 2001. I mentioned that he had that shoot training. Well, that became a blessing and a curse. Here's why. Wins the G1 in 2001. Now, this was before the days when the G1 winner would automatically get the shot in the Tokyo Dome. That it didn't mean that back then. It was just an elevation. You won the big tournament. It was a very important thing for him. New Japan saw that MMA promotions were doing very, very well in the turn of the century in Japan. We mentioned it before on this show. K1, kickboxing, Pride fighting. Not so much the UFC, although UFC did run shows over there. But they had their own promotions, and there were several of them, and they would do huge business. And then, of course, they were only doing events like every other month or so, every quarter, because it was MMA, and it wasn't something that you did in full-blown tours of and things back then. But when they had them, they were big. Antonio Inoki, who was still running New Japan at the time, began to think that this was going to be the way to go. That he always enjoyed mixing martial arts in with his wrestling, and he started bringing in more of that. So he would bring in these shoot fighters. He would bring in kickboxers, even guys, some sort of pit fighters from Eastern Europe, and put them in with his top guys. The issue with this, none of these people were trained in pro wrestling, Jeremy, and they weren't doing worked shoots and then doing regular pro wrestling just doesn't mix on the same show. You have to kind of lose yourself in the concept of what you're watching. So like when you're watching things like UWFI, they would make it look as much like a shoot as possible. When you would watch pro wrestling, it would look like a pro wrestling match. When you alternate those two on a show, it doesn't really work. It keeps taking you out of things. Here's here's a fake match. Is that what it is? Like, we just watched a shoot match. Now we're going to watch a fake one. Business started declining. They also made a huge mistake with Eugene Nagata. They decided to book him in a real match, like an MMA match. Now we're not working this.
No.
We're not going to work. It's not going to be like. And guess who they decided to take? They took Mirko Cro Cop, a huge MMA star, an absolutely legit guy.
I vaguely remember this back in the day.
2001, Mirko Cro Cop, which is not easy to say. It wasn't back then either. Was a huge star in mixed martial arts. He was a killer as well.
He was a monster. He was absolutely
Now, Nagata is no wimp by any stretch of any imagination, but Greco-Roman wrestling involves zero striking, and you can only attack from the waist up. There's so much he would have to learn to be effective at MMA from there, right? And I mean, they taught him some kicks and things, but it was all they taught him a worked shoot style.
This seems bad. This seems real bad.
18 seconds is how long that fight lasted against Mirko Cro Cop, and he was unconscious on the mat in 18 seconds.
If you had said over under 20 seconds and I had said over, I would have been angry.
This was a real wreck. It's a
black eye for New Japan as well.
It sure is.
It kills the legitimacy of the performers if you don't believe that they're actually the toughest men in the world.
I don't know what they thought Nagata was supposed to do with this. I don't know what New Japan thought he was going to do. No doubt Nagata went in there and did the best he could. I don't doubt for a second. I bet he trained his ass off. But this is not what he's prepared for. So he wins the G1, and then it was New Year's Eve of that big show. He in a show called Inoki Bomaye, which works in the whole Muhammad Ali Association and all that. He got knocked out in 18 seconds. So the G1 winner conked in 18 seconds. So obviously that hurt him a lot. It just didn't work out as well there. So it took him a little while to recover from that. However, I mentioned he lost to Taro Yasuda in 2002 when the title was vacated. They built him back up. And while it did hurt him for a while, on April 5th, 2002, he won the IWGP title for the first time, defeated Yasuda. So he held that one for over a year and lost it eventually to Yoshihiro Takayama in May of 2003. Okay, now we're back on track. He's had the title for over a year. He's reestablished. He's a champion. You know what we should do, Jeremy?
What should we do?
Let's book him in another shoot fight on New Year's Eve this year after that.
So you didn't learn your lesson.
Not a little bit. Not even a little bit.
Bummer.
So how about now? Last time we put him up against a killer. We shouldn't do that, right? There's no way we're going to do that. That didn't work. No question about it. We're going to learn a lesson from that too, aren't we, Jeremy?
No, we're
not. No, not at all. No, not even a little bit. Fedor Emelianenko.
Cool.
So the former IWGP champion faces Fedor Emelianenko on New Year's Eve in 2003.
Oh no.
Went exactly as well as you think it would. He got destroyed again.
No, it did not.
Again, this whole idea of him training with these guys to do this worked shoot style was a blessing and a curse for Nagata at this point in his career, because they keep throwing him in here with these guys just thinking, well, just do the best you can. And he gets mowed down. But, he's working hard. He tries to rebuild himself up. He does something that no one else has ever done. 2007, he won the New Japan Cup and became the first man ever to win both a cup and a G1. So there you go. Now we're working our way back up. He won the and then he parlayed that into winning the IWGP title again, April 13th, 2007, his second reign from Hiroshi Tanahashi.
So how long did it take from rehabilitating him from these two losses to him winning the titles and getting a certain level of prestige? 5 years?
Yeah, well, I mean, until they put him back up on top. So he lost the thing on December 31st, 2003 to a Fedor. That was that one. And then, so he's just about to start 2004. 3 years later, he wins the Cup and then the New Japan or the IWGP title. He was not he wasn't at the bottom of the card that whole time. He was still a big star. In fact, he feuded with Minoru Suzuki. He was working with some of the guys toward the top of the card right there. But I think it does say something that it took 3 years before they went back to him.
It is a considerable chunk of change to be on ice as a result of poor booking and then rehabilitated to the top, especially during that time.
And he had tag team runs in there too and things. I mean, he was a star. He was a wrestling star, but he was not the guy again for another 3 years. So so that was in April. He lost it back in October. So that was a bit of a shorter reign right there, but it still did the job. He won the 0-1 title, which is another company that New Japan was working with in 2008. At this point, he's built up his name up into a guy that has been on top for a while in New Japan, has held the title twice, won a G1, won a New Japan Cup. So anytime New Japan would work with another company, Nagata would often go over there and represent New Japan in that company when they had a working agreement. That became something that he did fairly frequently. Because in all of this, unlike most of the people in this era, he stayed with New Japan the entire time. I mean, he has been a loyalist in that sense. He has worked in other promotions, but it's always been as a New Japan representative. Even when he was in WCW, that was his excursion. He's been a lifelong New Japan guy. He had a that rivalry with Suzuki, spanned multiple years, and it even included the Triple Crown, which was All Japan's title that Suzuki held for a while there. So they actually had a match at the Tokyo Dome for the Triple Crown belt. In fact, he and Suzuki rivaled so long that they wrestled at the January 4th show. This is a little bit they faced each other pre-Wrestle Kingdom era and post-Wrestle Kingdom era. And both 2006 and in 2013 in January 4th matches, or 2014, they were. So this rivalry was something that they could always go back to. It's like, if you needed something for these guys to do, you can put Nagata and Suzuki in there, working that stiff kind of MMA influenced style. Those two guys were experts in doing it and knew how to work with one another, both respected the hell out of one another, and both beat the living hell out of one another in those matches. And there are a few of those on New Japan World that are worth going back and checking out, because the younger Nagata, the younger Suzuki, pretty rough. I mean, better them than me as far as taking some of those shots they were giving each other. But, excuse me. He has other accolades, of course, held a lot of titles. He won the tag league twice, once with Takashi Iizuka and once with Wataru Inoue. And he won the tag team championship twice. Once was with Nakanishi and once with Inoue. Interesting thing about the Inoue title win. So I mentioned that they won the tag league. They also defeated for that title. They won it in a 3-way match. The other two teams, by the way, Giant Bernard, Prince Albert now, and the guy that basically trains the people, the head trainer at NXT, and Carl Anderson was one of the teams. So Giant Bernard, Carl Anderson. The other team, Team No Limit, the young Tetsuya Naito and Yujiro Takahashi. So we're just spanning generations here. I mean, we're talking about Ultimo Dragon. We're talking about the UWFI guys, Nobuhiko Takada, all the way to Naito and Yujiro Takahashi. And then he did something else that hasn't happened very often. He went and won the All Japan Champion Carnival tournament in 2011. So he has all these accolades there. And it's just one of those guys that when New Japan needs someone with real credibility to work with someone from another company, it's Eugene Nagata, because it's just somebody that everyone's seen for years. They know him, they respect him, they know he's tough, they know he's good, and he's just a classic New Japan babyface. And of course, like I mentioned, most of what he does now is working with the young lions in the dojo and in the ring. He's frequently in those tag matches with them, against them. and Hiroshi Tenzon is another one that work with those guys in the dojo a lot. And really, when you look at him, the threads of his career going through various different eras in New Japan, and now the work he's done with those young lions, and of course we've seen how good those young lions are. While he sometimes appears as just kind of an elder statesman, a guy that's kind of in those early young lion matches or 6-man, 8-man matches, this is one of the more valuable players in New Japan history over the last 25 years, 30 years now, for Nagata having his anniversary show in Chiba. So just to give you an idea of the history behind that man there, of Eugene Nagata, certainly a Hall of Famer in every sense of every word.
When you are going over this stuff and it becomes abundantly clear the availability of knowledge and talent that is in the New Japan locker room that people can learn from, like, I get having guys like Jerry Lawler and whatnot in the WWE locker room teaching people what they know. But I feel like the knowledge that the Japanese New Japan veterans have that they can impart upon the younger generation of New Japan wrestlers feels miles more important than some of the stuff that Western workers are teaching younger generations. I don't know, like that's just a takeaway that I have, but it very much feels like the respect and the reverence for what has come before is taken very seriously and incorporated into the current product.
Yeah, you're not going to hear too many young lions do an interview like Adam Page where he says, "I don't feel like I have to take advice."
Yeah,
not going to hear that from those guys. I think they're a lot smarter than that, and thankfully they listen when guys like Nagata and all that talk. And not that Adam Page isn't good. I'm not trying to say that, but you see the quality of the young lions when they do come up. I think it's because
the discourse is different between Japan and the United States when it comes to younger and veteran workers. 100%.
And there's a lot of selflessness in the way that those veterans give to the young lions as well. And don't get me wrong, they're getting paid to do it and all that, but there does seem to be a real mission to impart their knowledge upon the younger folks up there.
I hate to use the campsite mentality, but you leave the place better than how you found it.
There you go. See that? Exactly. So anyway, that's our thoughts on that this week. Jeremy, do you have anything else we want to go over here before we wrap up?
I don't think so. We're going to be having a special guest in 2 weeks. Scott Edwards will be the special guest of our show to talk the Stardom aspect of the Royal Quest and to educate us on the things that we don't know going into it. And by transitive properties, educating you, the viewer, on the things that you may not know about Stardom or know that we don't know. And then you can point out how dumb we are. I don't care. Just watch our show. Just join Scott Edwards. We're going to have a great time. But yeah, we're going to go over the normal stuff next week. The week after is Royal Quest stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and give my socials out. Jer Firestone on the Twitter. You can find me here and other places on Fight Game Media. I do all the video editing work on the site. So if you see video editing stuff and you think it looks great or think it looks bad, call me, baby. Call me. So, but Stephen Conway over here, he was on another podcast this past week in addition to his stuff. So what podcast were you on? And
I got to do the rap with Keila Cash and Scott Young. That was a lot of fun talking WWE with those guys as always. So the rap is on the Fight Game podcast feed. We're here on the Fight Game Media YouTube feed. So been all over the place. But yeah, that's those shows. Make sure you check that stuff out, both the Patreon, the podcast feed, the YouTube feed. So many great shows covering all aspects of wrestling. We mentioned earlier it's impossible to follow everything. So these are in, we have people covering everything from boxing to MMA to pro wrestling from every part of the globe. It's just a valuable resource, Fight Game Media, podcast, YouTube, and on fightgamemedia.com. I'm Stephen Conway. I'm at StephenConway88 on Twitter. I also have my history site, ringsidereplay.com. So with that in mind, we're going to wrap it up for this week. We'll be back next week to talk more about the happenings, comings, and goings in New Japan, and we'll go over every announcement, every card, everything that you need to know to keep track of what we happen to feel It's the best wrestling company out there right now, New Japan Pro Wrestling. So for Jeremy Feinstone, I'm Stephen Conway. Thanks for watching. Speaking of strong style, we'll see you next week. Take care.